Time now to hear about the Construction Industry Accord, which, after some problems in the industry a wee while ago, was quickly formed, and we'd love to hear how it's going. Peter Reidy is the CEO of Fletcher Construction, and Peter's going to give us an idea on how the Construction Industry Accord has gone. Go for it.
Kia ora tātou nā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa, ana haere mai. Thank you. I'm here really representing the Industry Accord. I've got a co-chair, Chris Bunny. Chris is on the panel after me, so we decided to split the role up. Look, we've got some slides here, but I thought what we'd do is have a sort of overview of what it is, you know, why it was set up, some of the comments that we've had initially. There's a number of Accord members in the room here. And really just give you an oversight as to the progress, but most importantly, where are we at as an Accord sector group. So, thank you very much. So, this sector matters to New Zealand. A lot of you would know that. 10% of New Zealanders are employed in the sector. Government's a $10 billion investor in the sector. It's about $25 billion and grown in terms of work put in place. Over the last sort of 2007 to 2015, it's had one of the lowest productivity factors, less than 4% productivity in those periods. 7% of New Zealand's GDP, and the most important thing is it's got the highest suicide rate in our sector. It's a sector that's not performing, you know that. It's a sector that's got some real issues, but yet it's a sector that's been growing. So fundamentally, it's got some systemic issues, and that, I think, was alerted to the government when a number of organisations lost significant money and a number of organisations went broke and walked away from the industry. Next slide, thanks. I can do that, can I? It's all there you go. As you know, boom and bust, lots of examples of that, and the challenges are impacted by all of us. As the slide that Sarah said put up there was, procurement performance has fallen, and it's currently now, on top of that, it's got an infrastructure mix that is changing. So not only is the procurement process and the industry struggling, it's also got some pipeline issues. Really, when this started back in late November, December really, how this got started was that there's a number of organisations that, and I've been members of those, who are doing some really good things, but not connected across New Zealand. So doing some very good things, deep and narrow, coming up with good point solutions for their sector. But what the government clearly articulated was, we can't handle having, you know, over 50, 60 organisations trying to deal with some of these issues. But yet they realise when you employ 10% of New Zealanders, government's the largest procurer at $10 billion a year. The health sector has had massive failures, the education sector failures. Lots of sectors had failures, the private sector's had failures. Also, there's something that needs to be done. So the government basically contacted a group called the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum. And the only reason they contacted them was there was a broad representation of business leaders that weren't purely about construction or design or engineering, but they were business leaders. And the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum had done a lot of work in the forestry sector around health and safety. So a couple of people went to them and said, look, how do you think we face this problem? So it was the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum that got some people together and said, how do we have a conversation with people that aren't locked into a point solution and trying to think across the sector? So that's how the Industry Accord got set up. It was pretty simple. And initially a lot of people said, well, why should this accord be set up? We've got the solution, we've got the answers, we know what the problems are. What the group did when they came together, and I remember there's a number of people here in the room at the first session, we realised after a couple of sessions that we've all got a lot in common. A lot more in common than we thought. It doesn't matter whether it's group housing, whether it's vertical, whether it's horizontal, whether it's water, whether it's roads. when we started to get people around the table who were involved in the whole ecosystem, that's designers, planners, property council, clients like water, Fonterra were there, large procurers were there, constructors were there, lawyers were there. We started to flesh out over a period of sessions that we have a lot of industries in common. But there's a number of issues that we're trying to address, and everyone was trying to come up with a solution. But when we stood back and just focused on the issues, it was very clear, and a lot of you will know this, we all know this, but it was very good over a period of time to actually get clarity on the problem to be solved. A fragmented construction sector, very low levels of resilience, poor skills, lack of shared leadership across the group, lack of collaboration and transparency, particularly on what's working well. So not a lot of learning across the sector. And it was interesting, and there's one report I'd refer you to. It's a report that Treasury have done, Karen Mitchell, on the 3rd of July. It's the issues of the NZS contract conditions. It's an amazing report, and it really epitomises the issues in the industry. And this report looked at a lot of government contracts. And what this report says, and it was quite clear through the sessions we had in the Accord, was that there's been an erosion of trust right across the sector. There's a culture of mistrust, lack of knowledge, and material participation across the ecosystem. It's risk transferred by stealth. Now, for those of you in the private sector, if you looked at an acquisition in an industry and it had those dynamics, you would not invest. You would not invest because if the industry is operating like that, you're not going to be able to get the returns. But the industry we have right now, that's what we see. So when the industry accord, construction accord came together, the key principles were, this is a partnership between government and industry. And like many of you, I've been around a few of these industries. This is the first time I have seen 6 ministers sign an accord. A number of us have met with every one of those ministers, and their commitment is incredible. Industry dialogue has been unbelievably open and straightforward in the last 6 months. And I think what we got to with the industry accord was we all realised that actually this is a moment in time, this is a platform for change. There are systematic problems across the system, so we need people who can think about the system and the well-being of New Zealanders. And really, as we started to get this accord going, we started to get quite bold in what we thought needed to be done, rather than playing around the edges. And most importantly, the commitment from the government and the funding from government, who want a cross-section partnership. When this first started, and I'll be honest with this, when this first started, it started as the industry needs to sort itself out and get on with it. It's now changed very clearly towards partnership between government and industry, saying we need to work together to have a more productive industry. So we identified key success criteria, and this was some of them. So, strong leadership and governance. We looked at models around the world. We had KPMG come down to talk to us globally. There are no models globally that we can point to that have done this successfully. New South Wales have come up with 10 points of good practice that's been developed by government. The UK have come up with a new deals program that's been quite transformative, and there's some elements there that we want to take into ours. But ours is a pure partnership between government and industry, and I think you can see some signs of that by Treasury doing an analysis on conditions of contract. It really says that government is willing to take a look at the government contracts to make sure they're a good client. The other success factors we saw were that there needs to be investment in technology, more of whole-of-life thinking across, better positive behaviours, better health and safety performance, a fair, transparent and procurement processes. So we came up with a whole lot of successes, but most importantly, and this went round and round the table, I can tell you, we all of a sudden realised with all the things we had in common, first and foremost, this is about behaviour. So we could have sat in a room and said, look, here's a whole lot of things we need to do, and the vertical guys have done some good stuff, and the group housing guys have done some good stuff. First and foremost, we said, let's identify the behaviour principles. So we identified the vision, which is a highly productive, performing construction sector for a better New Zealand. We identified behaviour principles. We identified 5 of them. Be bold, trusting relationships, value our people, and active collective responsibility. So it's 4. And those 4 are in the accord. When we first launched this, we talked about behaviours. And everyone said, what a talk fest, what a waste of time. I remember I was interviewed by Hoskins, and he just went nuts. But we stuck to it, and we said, this is about behaviour, and it's been great to see the Treasury analysis come out and said, this is first and foremost about behaviour in terms of collaboration. So the construction sector accord is intended to be a catalyst for change. It's about shared outcomes, and we've identified those outcomes. It's been signed by 6 ministers. It's currently got about 24 industry partners around the table across the ecosystem, from design, construction, legal, government agencies, local government, union member. It's got 3 highly performing leaders in the government sector. Deputy Secretary of Health, the head of MB, and the head of Education. And they are around the table co-designing this, along with some large customers, large procurers, large with other players in the system as well. So what have we done? So firstly, as you normally do, you put together a transformation plan to get on with it, and we said, well, hold on, let's just stand back here. Let's make sure we've got clear behavioural outcomes. Let's make sure in phase 1 we identify what those are, and we put those out. And we said, the government said, okay, we want a plan. We want a plan by December, because next year's election year. Let's get on with it. We have resisted that. This is not something you package up with a bow and you put it up for an election year, and we will resist that. This will come in waves. The first wave is we brought the team together. We changed the Accord team a little bit. We brought some new people in who could think at the sector level, system level, making sure we had a broader representation. We made sure we put a governance process in with ministers, so we're regularly updating them. We've tightened up. We've got a very strong PMO. We've got about 3 or 4 people in the PMO that are doing a lot of heavy lifting. We asked Dean Kimpton, we left Auckland Council, to come and help us, and Dean's doing a great job, a couple of days a week. It's probably more like 5, but I've asked him to help me with 2 days a week with Chris Bunny. Just really getting some coordination and some shaping going on. So in terms of the plan, we're now into phase 2 in terms of working together with government industry to develop a detailed transformation plan by the end of this year. We're now going out into the market with wide sector consultation, and we'll talk about that shortly in terms of the dates. We've identified a number of working priority areas. We've identified 9, and they're on a lot of this information is on the Construction Accord website. We've identified a lot of initiatives that are already in play. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, which we're documenting, but we're also putting in place leaders in terms of 9 working groups to start to have consultation with sector leaders. And those 9 priority working areas are leadership and collaboration, business performance, culture and reputation, workforce capability, which is a big one, risk management, health and safety, more houses, better durability, procurement pipeline, and building regulations. We've identified sector champions for those. We've got some sector sessions coming up shortly, and we're starting to get a lot of engagement in terms of the people who work in the business. What's happened in the last couple of months? There's been quite a few initiatives. So firstly, you've seen the government rules of sourcing, new rules of sourcing come out with a greater emphasis on whole of life. They go live October 1. That's work in progress. MB are doing a lot of work to roll that out. That is work in progress. You've seen a new government transmission pipeline come out. A lot of us aren't happy with it, but it's transparent, it's there, it'll start to be built upon. You've seen the Treasury review of the NZS conditions of contract, which is an honest, real and insightful report. Last week was the first pan-government agency group that the Accord pulled together, which had MB, HUD, Housing New Zealand, WorkSafe, Ministry of Energy, NZTA, and that's about how we can get the agencies working together to take some of these Accord principles in, because if they're not aligned, we're not going to get anywhere. If they're not aligned with industry, we're not going to get anywhere. So that was the first session there, and they're now developing their information to take back through to their agencies and start to get them involved in the work groups and the conversations that are moving forward. In terms of our timeline, we've got a fair bit of activity to do in the next 60 days. We've got some public sector and we've got some public workshops and some sector workshops. So it's on the website, but in Wellington, September the 26th, we're having one. August 28th next week in Christchurch, and September the 4th in Auckland. And these are a variety of an hour and a half sessions where it's a bit of information gathering, but also Q&A, and really testing some of the thinking and the ideas coming through. And the sector leader workshops are very much around discussing the initiatives, what will make the boat go faster, getting a coalition of the willing through the sector groups, and making sure we're holding on to what we think will work in terms of the first wave of the program. We've also had a look at what's been happening with other transformations. There's been a lot of lessons learned in New Zealand. Some things have worked, some things haven't. We have a challenge group that we've set up, and there's a number of members on that challenge group that will challenge what comes out of the Accord in terms of the sector workshops to make sure that it's peer-reviewed, making sure that we take in lessons from other transformations. We want to make sure that the initiatives we come up with have got clear measures, they've got visible leadership, they're successful, so we'll probably break them into a number of waves. When the report comes out, it'll probably talk about the hard stuff that can be delivered in 18 months, and then there'll be another wave of what can be delivered after that. Certainly some of the input that's been come through the survey that Sarah just showed you, we'll make sure that gets fed through the Accord as well. I think we're starting to identify what a beacon project might look like. So a beacon project would be a project that has started to take some of the Accord principles into play. There's been some learnings. We'll go through a process shortly to define with the Accord what is the criteria for a beacon project. How do we measure that? How do we communicate that? And how do we get the learning across the New Zealand sector in terms of the benefits by working in a different way? And I think that'll be quite exciting. We've already got a number of procurers wanting to put up some projects to be beacon projects. So, just finally, how can you get involved? What can you do? The website's up there. Just type in Construction Accord. We've got regular information on there. It outlines the dates for the sector workshops coming up. You can champion the Accord in your own business. There have been some wonderful examples of people talking about, well, is this contract in line with the Construction Accord? There was one contract that came out about 3 months ago. There was one company that said, this does not line up with the Accord principles, and we're a member of the Accord. In fact, it's so far away, we're not going to tender. And that agency had no one to do the work. You've now got government agencies who have been significant commitment from ministers saying you must be involved. You must get involved in this. And I've heard the pressure in the meetings, and I've seen it, and I've seen the attendance of some of the key officials to say, right, how do we get involved now? So it's great to see a pan group across the agencies. We can hold one another to account. We can learn off each other. It's fine to talk in a room about how do we look at risk transfer, but yet go into contracts and not even talk about that. One of the great ideas that's come up, and I know Treasury are looking at it, is how do we have a risk framework in the front of our contracts? How do we have a risk transfer arrangement before we sign a contract? So we have spent a lot of time talking about risk, who will manage it, what is the risk? Because that language gets lost a bit. We've all been involved in those conversations. So I think what we'll see come out of this information is some practical things that we know will work that we probably did before, and some of us are doing now, but generally the industry is not learning. You can sign up to the Accord website. You can share your stories. We're actively going to get information out to the Accord members, and really just start to ask questions, start to share the information. I think this now has got significant momentum. The ministers are very excited about it. They're putting a lot of pressure on us. There's a lot of momentum around the room in terms of people getting engaged. So we look forward to the next update, which will obviously be before the next conference, because we've got to get a report out by the end of the year. Thank you.